Welcome to another Chess.com podcast. Today we're going to be looking at tips for using bishops in endgames. In this first example we have opposite coloured bishops and white has two connected passed pawns. So how does he promote one of these pawns? Well, the trick is to place the pawns onto the opposite coloured square than your bishop is. So first let's look at what happens if white doesn't know this and instead pushes f6. Thinking that his pawns are now on the same colour as his bishop and could be protected that way. Well, all black has to do in this situation is stop the move g6. So bishop comes to c2, and then there's not much the white bishop can do. It's a pretty much useless piece on the board. So now we have a situation where it's two pawns versus a bishop, which is a draw. And if we just cycle through some moves here, we can see how white tries to gain control of the f5 square with his king, but is forced away by the black bishop, and at no point can white play the move g6, and we have a draw. So going back to our original position, what would happen if black played g6? Well, now we can see that the black bishop can infiltrate the position much more easily and help his pawns move forward. So king comes to f6 here, trying to blockade the position. King to f4, bishop to c2, maybe looking to trade the pawns off there, but it's to no avail. The king can simply be kicked back, and then the pawns push forward with f6, and we can easily see that using the same tactic again, white would promote and win the endgame. So now let's look at a different situation and a different rule when pushing our pawns. Okay, the second tip about how to use the bishops in the endgame is to look at what colour bishop you've got. So here we have a dark squared bishop, which means that if we try to promote a pawn, it would be easier if we could control the queening square. So in this case, one's a light square, one's a dark square. So therefore, this pawn here on f4, although not as advanced, is more important to us than the pawn on c5. Because black would be able to put either his king or his knight on c8, and it won't be able to be attacked by the bishop, so it could just stay there and defend the square. Whereas if either the king or the knight was on f8, then the bishop could attack this square and either remove the piece or take the piece, and allowing the pawn to push on. Now this isn't a great example because it's a drawn position no matter what. But here we can see that the black knight is attacking both the pawns, and the stronger move for black to give black something to think about would be to defend the f4 pawn. So playing a move such as d4, losing the f4, would be a much easier position for black to draw than if bishop came to say e5. Or indeed if the bishop came to d2. Personally, I quite like the move e5 because if the knight takes on e5, then this is a one position for white. It gives black something more to think about. Okay, now we're going to look at a very quick and easy puzzle where white wins with a bishop and a pawn. Okay, here we are. Now it's impossible to win with just the bishop on the board, but if you have a bishop and a pawn, there are a few rare examples where this can happen. I won't go as far as to call this a puzzle, but here we can see how white executes a nice victory. So the black king is stuck, there's no squares he can move to. We do bishop down to c8, and now black's bishop move is irrelevant. He obviously has to stay along this diagonal, plays bishop d5, for example, but after bishop b7, check, the bishop has to take off, and then a takes, b7, checkmate. I hope you've learned a little bit about how to use the bishop in the endgame, controlling the queen in squares. And in our next podcast, we're going to be looking at how to mate with two bishops. Okay, thank you for watching another Chess.com podcast.